Can you remember a time when you were down to your last prayer? A moment that was so dark that all hope rested on a small, faint light in the distance. Well, Jesus encountered a woman like that, a woman who had suffered for 12 long years from a chronic disorder. She had no money, no friends, no solutions, nothing. Nothing, that is, except a crazy hunch that Jesus could help and a high hope that he would. In essence, she had faith. So what is faith? Well, Hebrews 11:1 defines it as the confident assurance that what we hope for is going to happen, the evidence of things we cannot see. Max Lucado calls it a conviction that God can and a hope that he will. I first came across this sermon title, A Crazy Hunch and a High Hope, when I was reading a book by Max Lucado called He Still Moves Stones. He has a chapter entitled A Crazy Hunch and a High Hope, and so I stole the title from him. So I hope that you'll forgive me for that, but I thought it described faith in such a powerful way. And in that chapter, he tells this story. And so I want to tell the story my way, and I want to bring out some things in it because I think that we can learn some powerful lessons from her. A woman who desperately needed a touch from God. And she did 4 things that I think helped bring about her healing and that we can learn and in turn act upon the things that we learn so that we can maybe bring about healing. And as we talk about this, I want you to understand that healing is up to God. And so just because I do all the right things, it all comes down to what is his will, what he designs, because I see the world through a peephole, right? I only see what's right in front of me, but God sees the whole parade. He sees the beginning and the end, and he's going to do what is best for me. So while I may say, God, the best thing for me is for you to heal me, he may say, no, you still haven't learned all the lessons I want you to learn. Or he may have something even bigger planned. And so I want to preface this by saying, I'm not saying that if you do these 4 things, God's going to heal you. It's going to happen according to his will. But these are things that I believe that that this woman did to bring about her healing and that you and I can do to make some headway in that very thing. So let's take a look at this together. The first thing that I want you to see that she did is that she recognized her need of him. Every one of us are in that boat. You can't live without Jesus. And certainly you can't die without him. But I think that when we get to a place where we need a touch from God, it's important for us to realize that he is the one who gives life. He's the one who sustains life. And he's the one who determines if I have life at all. And so he is the one who determines my healing. And so she recognized her need of him. If we look in Mark chapter 5, verses 25 and 26, it says a woman in the crowd, so there's a crowd of people following Jesus, which is always the case. When I go to preach at other places, there aren't crowds that show up because of that. They're not at the door waiting in line to get in. But whenever Jesus went somewhere, everybody flocked. It says a woman in the crowd had suffered for 12 years with constant bleeding. She had suffered a great deal from many doctors, and over the years she had spent everything she had to pay them. But she had not gotten better. In fact, she had gotten worse. Now, we don't know her name. We only know her story. She suffered for over a decade with a chronic condition that's affected her in many different ways. So she's bleeding all the time. It's affected her financially. So Mark says that she's gone to multiple doctors. She's done everything she could. She's spent everything she had. She's not gotten better. In fact, she's gotten worse. Not only that, the Talmud lists several potential cures for this disease. As I said, Mark makes it sound like she's tried multiple things. Some of these cures were legit. Others were kind of old wives' tales, like carrying the ashes of an ostrich egg in a linen cloth. It's kind of silly. But some people believe that would work. It's affected her maternally. In all likelihood, she can't have kids. It's affected her relationally. For a person who's bleeding, they're considered unclean, and anything or anyone that they touch becomes unclean. So her friends all most likely abandon her because if she touches them, now they're unclean. And so people won't want to have anything to do with her. She's a social outcast. I doubt she was ever married. But if she was, her husband's been long gone, because there was a Jewish Pharisaic tradition that encouraged couples to divorce if the wife was of childbearing age, but they couldn't have children. So it's affected her in her relationships. It's affected her emotionally. Imagine what she's been through. It's affected her domestically, because everything she touches becomes unclean. So she can't cook. She can't use the computer. She can't drive. It's affected her spiritually, because anyone who's bleeding and is considered unclean isn't allowed inside the temple. So she's mentally exhausted and socially ostracized. She needed Jesus, and she knew it. Years ago, I was in a singing group that traveled all over the country, and one tour, we were on tour for about 8 weeks one year, and we were in Arizona. And I started having some teeth pain, and I went to a dentist somewhere in the mountains of Arizona. And the dentist said, "Your wisdom teeth need to come out. Have you been told this before?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, why haven't you had them out?" And I said, "Because I don't want them out." And he said, "Why don't you want them out?" And I said, "Because it sounds painful, and I don't like pain." So what I did is every time I had a dentist tell me my wisdom teeth came out, I changed dentists in hoping that I would eventually find one to say, "Nah, they're okay." But that didn't happen, and so finally I gave in, took about a week off from the tour, flew back to Tulsa, Oklahoma. My parents were missionaries in Ecuador at the time, so I was basically homeless, except on a college campus. And so I had a pastor friend who was out of town and told me that I could stay in his house in Tulsa for the week and have my oral surgery. So I went there, and the first night that I'm at their house, they had told me, they had left me some notes, and one of the things that they said was, if the phone rings, could you answer it and then write down the message. This was before people had cell phones. Shortly before people had electricity. And so I'm there in their house, and the phone rang, and so I answered it, and I have a little pad to write on. And the person on the other end of the line goes like this, "Could you tell me the number to the teen suicide hotline?" And well, that's a strange request. So I asked the obvious question, "Why do you need the number to the teen suicide hotline?" And the guy said, "Because my life is meaningless, I've lost hope, and I'm about to blow my brains out." And I realized that this was pretty serious, and that I needed to try to keep the kid on the phone and try to talk to him a little bit. And so I said, "Tell me your name." And he goes, "I'm not going to tell you my name." And I said, "All right, well, I don't want to talk to a nameless person and just, call you, hey, you, so I'm going to call you Mike." Now, let me tell you, I think that the name Mike popped in my head because right before this phone call, I had just finished watching Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls beat the Phoenix Suns in the NBA Finals. So I think, I want to be like Mike, right? And so I think he was just on my mind. And so I said, "I'm going to call you Mike." And the guy goes, "Whoa, wait. How do you know my name, man?" And he goes, "Are you some kind of psychic?" And I said, "Well, sort of." I said, "Hey, Mike, how did you get this number?" And he said, "I just dialed it." And I said, "You just randomly dialed this number hoping it was a teen suicide hotline?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "So you didn't know you were calling the house of a pastor?" And he goes, "I did." And I said, "Yeah, and I bet you don't know you're talking to somebody who works with teenagers sometimes." "You do?" And I said, "Yeah, hey, Mike, you ever hear of a guy named Jesus? And he said, yeah, I've heard of him. And I said, well, let me tell you a little bit about him. So I started talking about Jesus, and then I talked about how Romans 3:23 says that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, and how Romans 6:23 says that the wages of sin is death, and how the Bible says that without the shedding of blood, there can be no forgiveness of sin. In other words, because of the sin of the world, somebody had to die. And that's why John 3:16 tells us that God loved the world so much that he gave his one and only Son, so that whoever believes in him would not perish but have everlasting life. And I said, Mike, when Jesus died on that cross, he gave your life great value. And he did it so that at this point you wouldn't be able to say, nobody cares about me. And so I'm starting to go into this little spiel about, how he needs to give his life over to Christ, and how, it's not going to make his problems go away, but he's going to have a renewed hope. And he interrupted me and he goes, can I do it now? And I was like, well, I wasn't finished with my talk, but sure. And so I led this kid to Christ who just minutes before was ready to end his life, and now he's giving his life over, because people who seek find. And he was seeking some kind of hope and some kind of help. I don't know if he was really calling a teen suicide hotline or not. To just randomly die, because there was a phone book thing back then. And so my guess is he was just randomly dialing a number in hopes that he would find somebody who would listen. Fortunately, I was done with the game and willing to listen. But this is what I'm talking about. If you want a touch from God, you have to realize that he is all you need, and that you need him. Psalm 34:8 says, taste and see that the Lord is what? Yes, he is. Number 2, she risked what little she had. She was willing to face the crowd, the mob. I'll explain what I mean in just a minute. In Mark 5:27, it says she heard about Jesus, so she came up behind him through the crowd. So was this risky? Yes, it was very risky. She had to come to him by working her way through a crowd, which means she's going to have to touch a few people. And anything or anyone she touches is going to be considered now unclean. If someone recognizes her, she's already a social outcast. Now she's going to really be facing it. I mean, if she touches someone and is recognized, the crowd's going to scatter. They're going to mock her. People are going to be angry at how selfish she is acting. And she had no guarantee from Jesus. No guarantee that he would help. Because here's the thing, in her mind, if she could just touch the hem of his robe, she'll be healed. But in touching the hem of his robe, that's going to make him unclean. And so she's taking a great risk. Maybe he says, whoa, lady, be touching me. Now look what you've done. And now maybe everybody's yelling at her and trying to get rid of her. Who knows what happens? She's taking a great risk here. But she's hoping that Jesus will help. She's longing for someone to help. But you see, faith isn't trusting God to do what you want. Faith is trusting God to do what is right. She's counting on that. So she took a risk. Someone wrote, to laugh is to risk appearing the fool. To weep is to risk appearing sentimental. To reach out for another is to risk involvement. To expose feelings is to risk exposing our true self. To place your ideas, your dreams before the crowd is to risk loss. To love is to risk not being loved in return. To live is to risk dying. To hope is to risk despair. To try it all is to risk failure. But risk we must, because the greatest hazard in life is to risk nothing. The man, the woman who risks nothing, does nothing, has nothing, is nothing. Someone said, let us live, let us love, let us share the deepest secrets of our souls. You go first. That's not risking. Remember when Peter walked on water? The disciples are in a boat, and there's a storm, and they're afraid they're going to die, and Jesus comes walking on the water, and they think he's a ghost. The Jewish people during this time were very superstitious, and they believed that if they saw a ghost, that meant they were about to die. It was like a foretelling of something bad that was coming. And so they're panicking, and Jesus says, "Hey guys, it's me, it's Jesus." And Peter says, "Jesus, if it's really you, then make me do what you're doing. Make me walk on water." And Jesus said, "Come on." And Peter stepped out of the boat and actually walked on water. Now, at some point in his mind, he went, "Wait a minute, I'm not supposed to be doing this." And he started listening to the waves and the wind. And what happened? He sank, right? And Jesus pulled him up, got him back to the boat, and then scolded him. "O ye of little faith." That's where that phrase comes from. Now, why did Peter get out of the boat? Well, he got out of the boat because that's where his rabbi was at. And he wanted to be there. But he didn't wait around for a promise. He didn't say, "Hey, Jesus, I'll come, but just make sure I don't drown," right? All he was doing was waiting for an invitation. And yeah, he came, yeah, he sank and he got scolded. He was the only one that happened to. But he was also the only one that walked on water that day. And so sometimes we have to be willing to take some risks. Eileen Gruder wrote, "You can live on bland foods so as to avoid an ulcer, drink no tea, coffee, or other stimulants in the name of health, go to bed early, stay away from nightlife, avoid all controversial subjects so as to never give offense, mind your own business, avoid involvement in other people's problems, spend money only on necessities and save all you can, and you can still break your neck in the bathtub and it will serve you right." Because sometimes we have to make some risks. Someone said there are three kinds of people in the world: those who make things happen, those who watch things happen, and those who wonder, what happened? Be the person who makes things happen. Number 3, she reached for him. She acted on her faith. It wasn't enough to recognize her need of him. It wasn't enough to risk. She had to act on her faith. So she made a move, because faith without works is dead. It's useless. Healing begins when we start to act on our faith. In the story in Mark 5:27 through 28, says that she touched his robe, for she thought to herself, "If I can just touch his robe, I'll be healed." Edgar Guest wrote the poem that says, somebody said that it couldn't be done, but he with a chuckle replied that maybe it couldn't, but he would be one who wouldn't say no till he tried. So he buckled right in with a trace of a grin on his face. If he worried, he hid it. He started to sing as he tackled the thing that couldn't be done, and he did it. Somebody scoffed, "Oh, you'll never do that. At least no one ever has done it." But he took off his coat and took off his hat, and the first thing he knew, he'd begun it. With the lift of his chin and a bit of a grin, without any doubting or quit it, he started to sing as he tackled the thing that couldn't be done, and he did it. There are thousands to tell you it cannot be done. There are thousands to prophesy failure. There are thousands to point out to you one by one the dangers that wait to assail you. But just buckle right in with a bit of a grin, then take off your coat and go to it. Just start in to sing as you tackle the thing that cannot be done, and you'll do it. If you take action, with God's help, nothing can stop you. In James 2:14 through 26, talks about faith. It says, "What good is it, dear brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith but don't show it by your actions? Can that kind of faith save anyone? Suppose you see a brother or sister who has no food or clothing, and you say goodbye and have a good day, stay warm and eat well, but then you don't give that person any food or clothing. What good does that do?" So you see, faith by itself isn't enough. Unless it produces good deeds, it is dead and useless. Now, someone may argue some people have faith, others have good deeds. But I say, how can you show me your faith if you don't have good deeds? I will show you my faith by my good deeds. You say you have faith, for you believe that there is one God. Good for you. Even the demons believe this, and they tremble in terror. How foolish. Can't you see that faith without good deeds is useless? Don't you remember that our ancestor Abraham was shown to be right with God by his actions when he offered his son Isaac on the altar? You see, his faith and his actions worked together. His actions made his faith complete. And so it happened just as the scriptures say. Abraham believed God, and God counted him as righteous because of his faith. He was even called a friend of God. So you see, we are shown to be right with God by what we do, not by faith alone. Rahab the prostitute is another example. She was shown to be right with God by her actions when she hid those messengers and sent them safely away by a different road. Just as the body is dead without breath, so also faith is dead without good works. So we have to act. Whether it's acting on our own or acting on behalf of someone else. The man's name was Gunnar Birkeland. He actually died years ago at the age of 90. He was born in Norway in 1886, and at the age of 2, he contracted a severe case of polio that resulted in him becoming totally crippled. The doctors at that time knew virtually nothing about polio, and so his caring parents, seemingly having no other alternative, placed him in a wooden box that they would pull by a rope. In the wintertime, they would put runners on the box, making it possible to pull in the snow. And in better weather, they would replace the runners with a set of wheels. Over the years, Gunnar would overhear people talking about him. If he's out in public, people would say, "Isn't that pathetic? How sad. He'll never get better. He's not going to live long, you know." Can you imagine being a little kid and hearing such defeating chatter, especially when it's about you? Well, one day when Gunnar was 7 years old, his parents accidentally left him in front of a mirror where he could see himself. And for the first time, he saw himself in the mirror in the box. But instead of being discouraged, it changed him. He started picturing himself standing, being out of the box. And something inside of him changed, and from that point on, he had a mission. It started by rocking in his box. His parents would hear him do that. Every now and then he'd rock the box to the point that he'd fall out of it. And his parents, they didn't know any better. They would come and they would scold him and put him back in the box. They just didn't know any better. They thought the box was the best place for him. But as soon as they left the room, they'd hear him rocking that box again. He would tell himself and anyone else who was listening, "I'm getting out of this box." And over time, he continued to rock it until he would make himself fall out of it. And once he did, he would start to crawl. It was kind of pathetic looking, but hey, he was out of the box. And eventually, he pulled himself up to where he was able to stand on his feet. And the time came where he kept working day after day on this till he reached a point that he actually was able to walk. The kid who they said nobody could help got himself out of the box and was able to walk because he acted on it. They say that when Gunnar Birkeland died, he was one of the 10 wealthiest men in Seattle. And they say that the Space Needle was actually built on a piece of property that he owned. You see, when you miss an opportunity, you miss success. But when you miss an opportunity with God, you miss the miraculous. This brings me to number 4. She received his healing touch. She received that touch, that healing that she had longed for. Mark 5:29 says, immediately the bleeding stopped, and she could feel in her body that she had been healed of this terrible condition. This is the only time in Scripture that Jesus healed someone before he realized it. It's the power of his presence. 1 Corinthians 2:9 says, no eye has seen, no ear has heard, and no mind has imagined what God has prepared for those who love him. Someone wrote, doubt sees the obstacles, faith sees the way. Doubt sees the blackest night, faith sees the day. Doubt dreads to take a step, faith soars on high. Doubt questions who believes, faith answers, I. So she received her healing touch. But I want you to look at what else Jesus did for her. Because he gave her something that she wasn't coming for. She was coming for healing, but he gave her much more than that. In Mark 5:30 through 34, Jesus realized at once that healing power had gone out from him, so he turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my robe?" His disciples said to him, "Look at this crowd pressing around you. How can you ask who touched me?" But he kept on looking around to see who had done it. Then the frightened woman, trembling at the realization of what had happened to her, came and fell to her knees in front of him and told him what she had done. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Your suffering is over." He didn't just heal her. He called her daughter. And in those days, the word daughter was a term of affection. To call someone daughter was to call them a treasure. And so here, in the midst of this crowd, where she's a social outcast, he tells her and tells them she is priceless, because she is. And so are you. Leo Tolstoy, the great Russian writer, tells of a time that he was walking down the street and passed a beggar. Tolstoy reached into his pocket to give the beggar some money, but his pocket was empty. So Tolstoy turned to the man and said, "I'm sorry, my brother, but I have nothing to give you." The beggar brightened up and said, "You have given me more than I asked for. You've called me brother." Max Lucado wrote, "To the loved, a word of affection is a morsel. But to the love-starved, a word of affection can be a feast." And Jesus gave this woman a banquet. You may think it's over today, but just wait. Keep on believing. With Jesus, it's never too late. The check may already be in the mail. The diagnosis you've been waiting for may be on the way. The relationship you've been hoping would turn around may already be on the mend. Don't give up yet. Let me talk you off the ledge. That sin that you think he could never forgive has already been forgotten. That heart that has grown cold has already been spoken for. Keep hope alive. God is still at work. In that book, He Still Moves Stones, Max Lucado wrote, only one person was commended that day for having faith. It wasn't a wealthy giver. It wasn't a loyal follower. It wasn't an acclaimed teacher. It was a shame-struck, penniless outcast who clutched onto her hunch that he could and her hope that he would. What's your story today? Whatever it is, there is hope if you have faith and you keep believing. Would you stand with us?